Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I am Monica Rhodes, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce this new video series. Well, not so new anymore since we are a month into it already, but this is July. So this is the July version series of Three and a Possible. And as we know, histories are often multi-layered, and this name of this show is no exception. So if you're a spades player, then you know the phrase, this is what you would use when you're predicting how many books you have in your hand in order to win. Three and Apostle also represents the essence of cultural preservation, which is not just a conversation about the past, but it's a conversation with the future as well. So it's predictive in nature. And then finally, through this series, I will be chatting with experts in the preservation space and asking 3 and possibly 4 questions per interview. So as y'all know, this is free flowing. It's a conversation with my community of practice and folks that I like hanging out with and appreciate the work that they do. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to the show and welcome Dr. Megan Springate into the conversation. Good to see you, Megan.
Good to see you too. How's it goes?
Oh, I can't complain. Life is good right now. But this conversation is about you. So Megan, could you tell us a little bit about, your background, what you do, all the things?
Sure. So I am an historical archaeologist by training, but I have sort of taken what I've learned in interpreting material culture, and I've been most recently applying it to places, right? So places, landscapes, buildings, they're all basically artifacts that you can't put in a paper bag and take into the labs, but the sort of thinking about the material world and its effect on people and how people move through it has just been part of my training. I did my first archaeology in 1987. I was 16 years old, probably not coincidentally the same year. I don't know, maybe coincidentally the same year that I came out to myself.
Okay.
So it was really interesting to navigate a live away archaeology summer camp for a senior social science credit and being queer at the same, right? It was
So
an
you went to
interesting
a camp.
space.
Okay.
It was a summer school, live away summer school, and that's where I fell in love with archaeology. I was like, I get this. I understand this, and I love the puzzle, and I love the being able, archaeology is really, really good at the everyday, right? All the stuff that doesn't make it into the archival record, that doesn't end up in court documents, right? It's like the everyday stuff that people don't put in their diary, right? It's what did you eat? What'd you eat off of it? What cutlery do you have? All of these really sort of daily minutia that people don't record, but are so rich to talk about people's histories. And I love doing this work. So I'm an historical archaeologist now. I started on a pre-contact site. And the thing that I love about this work is finding the stories that haven't been told or have been silenced. Because I just that moment when you're looking at artifacts or you're, rummaging archives or whatever, and it's you find these stories about these people and you're like, why didn't I know that? How come I never learned that in history class? Oh, wait, I totally know why I didn't learn that in history class because, right, racism, sexism, white supremacy, all of the above, right? Not a rich dead white guy. But these stories of everyday people doing amazing things, and then connecting those to the broader, the larger narrative of American history. I love it. I love everything about it.
Yeah.
And then sharing them.
Yeah. So is there a particular, I know you said you got started on a pre-contact site. And I know the work that you've done for the National Park Service and others are, 60s, 50s, 40s, 70s, some more, I don't want to say that's contemporary, but certainly not indigenous history, for example. But is there a particular period that you focus in on or that you like to explore? In your
I did. So I went from pre-contact, fell in love with archaeology, and then did my first, like many years later, I did my first historic field school. And I was just able to connect with that, I think, in a way that was like made sense, right?
yeah,
Um, because on the pre-contact site, we're looking at these hearth features, and we're looking at like shatter from making tools and bits of pottery, and I was like, this is really cool, but I don't understand it. Right? Like, um, but then I got into the historic, and I guess because of, I grew up in a historic period, and I, all these things, it made sense to me, and they
yeah,
were pieces that I could fit together, and like I could understand what I was looking at. And I have like mad respect for pre-contact archaeologists who do that work, and but it's just not me. And I did commercial archaeology for a number of years, so several kinds of permits require archaeology or historic preservation, like historic architecture
yeah,
assessments, right? So I worked for 6 or 7 years at a commercial archaeology company, and experience on everything,
yep,
everything from like pre-contact to Swedes on the Delaware River to 1930s farmsteads to fine metals refining in Newark and military sites. And it was just, and you asked me if there's anything that I really, really love. So here's the thing. I fall in love with every project I'm working on.
hmm.
Right? Like it's even if I'm doing like a cell tower, right? Like I have to get sort of emotionally invested. I get invested in those projects. For me, it's really, really important that the site, that I honor the site's history,
Yeah,
right? And sometimes that means like going to the mat with your colleagues about whether this is important or not, because it's like, no, like there's stories here that are important to tell. Just because it's the nth, farmstead, um, there's like stuff going on here, and
right.
it's very common to say, well, we've already got all these 1890s farmsteads. We don't need another one, so therefore it's not significant. Or if it's in the 20th century, it's too recent. And I'm like, have you looked at the calendar lately? Um,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I
yeah,
know that I also technically am, potentially significant, but
yeah.
by age.
I mean, we're all born in the 1900 and 1980s, 1900s. So
When you
absolutely.
say it like that, and it sounds terrible, but
Well,
it's
look, Megan, I do appreciate you not taking us into the world of like, Section 106 and NEPA, because those are some of the things that happen behind the closed doors, that are necessary processes
yep,
for preservation to happen. But these conversations are about stories,
yep,
and things that people connect with. But for all that are watching, there's a regulatory layer
indeed,
to the work
indeed.
that we do. It's possibly not as sexy, but nonetheless very important, extremely important. So Megan, before go ahead.
No, no, I was just gonna say I'm not one of those people who finds regulatory stuff sexy, but I know that there are people who do,
Yeah,
and like we need them also.
absolutely. It doesn't happen without that regulatory space, those conversations, those meetings that are very important to make sure that all voices are heard and accounted for. So with that being said, Megan, what are you up to these days? What's going on in your world?
Um, so I recently started a job with American Conservation Experience, working with the National Park Service. I am one of two national coordinators for Mellon Postgraduate Humanities Fellows. So they're funded through the Mellon Foundation, working in partnership with the National Park Service, American Conservation Experience, and the National Park Foundation, to work with specific parks and work with each other to help the Park Service really sort of expand the stories that they tell about American history. Some of the projects that are not in my cohort, we're still in the getting parks to sign up part of my cohort, but excuse me, they're 2-year fellowships, and some of the ones that are starting in September, they range from punk and go-go in Washington, D.C. study to looking at how indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, and Western science can speak to each other, to working with residential school records, to doing women's history, right? Like the gamut is huge, and I'm so excited to see what the fellows what they do, right? It's there's a lot of excitement around it, and I think the Park Service is going to see a real difference, and I think the public is going to see a real difference as we move through this project.
Oh man, that's exciting, because as we know, both working, well, you work with the Park Service. I'm was on the partnership side, but there's so much that park rangers, interpretive rangers, are just kind of getting all this information, and requests are coming all the time, and so to bring in some fresh perspective, people who are in the early parts of their careers,
Yep.
Have that funded by a funder like Mellon, who's doing incredible work. I think this is fantastic. This is like the perfect storm of funding with interest and parks, and supporting the work of our colleagues who work for NPS, who are doing so many things every time.
I'm excited too, because like the pandemic has been terrible, right, for everybody. I mean, I don't think we're handling the fallout particularly well, but that's another conversation. But in the Park Service, they really had to pivot from all these in-person programming to a lot of virtual stuff. And so these fellows are coming in at a time when there's a lot of work in the digital space and the virtual space that I think is really, really exciting. Like we saw I was at the time during the pandemic, I was the national coordinator for the 19th Amendment Centennial Commemoration for the Park Service. And to see people just like on a dime, switched all their programming, and then we saw parks like collaborating across the country and doing like virtual. It was super cool. So I'm really excited to see these fellows sort of like take that and run with it.
Yeah, and I also think it demonstrates like the possibility. I think a lot of federal agencies have sometimes a perception of being bureaucratic, challenging, very challenging to kind of move and spin the things. But I think that's a testament to NPS, their ability to shift when necessary to meet people where they are. And during the pandemic, that was virtually. And so I was at the Park Foundation at the time, and just saw this upswing of all this programming that just went online. And so it was a beautiful thing to see during that time.
It was amazing. Yeah. And it's really exciting. I mean, being in a place, there is nothing like being in a place. Like there just isn't, right? It's the same with art. There is nothing that compares to seeing an original piece of art in person. Right? Like first time I saw Salvador Dali's Persistent of Memory, which is like smaller. It's about the size of my computer screen. Yeah. It blew my mind, right? Like, but not everybody can get there.
Yep.
Right? For all the reasons, right? Money, time, transportation, ability, disability, all the things, right? And so you can get a sense of what it's like in a virtual space, and that's cool because it gets people excited.
Yeah. Before we pivot, because I'd like to hear more about the work that you accomplished as a 19th Amendment coordinator, as well as the work that you did around the LGBTQ study for the Park Service. I want to hear a little bit more about how parks, if they're interested in getting a fellow, how they could work with you to connect to this, to these funds, to the support that they need. How does that process work?
So perfect timing, because the request for proposals for parks to host a fellow opened on June 30th. So your timing is impeccable as always. They close on August 1st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. So there's like about a month to get the applications in. If you're behind the firewall, Park Service, you'll find a SharePoint site that has all kinds of information about it. You can also email the Park Foundation. It's on the grants website of the Park Foundation, or you can email me. It's megan_springate@partner.nps.gov. And I can put you in directions. For folks who are not in the Park Service, who are not looking to apply to host fellows, the applications to be a fellow should be live September, October. And they're 2-year gigs. So it's about 2 years working with a park and mentors to do the work. And then there's also time included in sort of what the work plan is to do your own research and prepare yourself for your future career. So yeah, that's all worked in there.
Man, I just can't, it's not a Park Service commercial, but I just can't stress the value enough of these types of experiences. I mean, it's how I started my career in the compliance division of the North. It's now Region 1, but it was the Northeast region then. And it's like, it just kind of opened up this world that I didn't know at the time, that, those things that I learned, I ended up implementing those in the different programs that I helped create for the park. So
it's good to have that background too, that so you can speak across the silos. Yep. Right? It's so important to be able to communicate with the public, with your peers, with the regulators, with the historians, with the science, right? Museum folks, collections, conservation. Everybody's speaking English, but you can have a conversation and be like, I know you're saying words that I understand, but I don't understand them when you put them all together.
Right. Or what are these acronyms? Every
oh God, yeah. What are these acronyms?
We all have our acronyms.
So, I mean, to be able to have those experiences and take them all with you, and be able to sort of translate across is really helpful. When I was working on the LGBTQ theme study, so I wrangled the LGBTQ theme study for the National Park Service. It came out in 2016. It's not like every other theme study. It's a little bit different. It's a lot different. It's 1,200 pages. It's available free on the National Park Service website. But I didn't have just historians, right? Like, I'm an archaeologist. I wrote a couple of chapters. We had early career historians, some of the titans agreed to write for this, or peer review. But there were also, community activists. We had a newspaper reporter, Tracy Baim, who out of Chicago, who ran the Windy City Times for decades, wrote a chapter. We had geographers, archaeologists, journalists, historians, public historians, preservation professionals, because all of these ways to come at the past and preservation and in these stories, they're all valid. They're just a different spin. And I wanted, so part of the theme study was to be intersectional, and I've done a lot of sort of thinking about how to do work intersectionally, because you can't say, well, now I'm going to talk about gender, and now I'm going to talk about class, and now I'm going to talk about race. It doesn't work, right? The minute you try to talk about them separately, your subject just vanishes.
Right, because we're all intersectional, exactly. So you have to take this approach. We're many things at one time.
Absolutely, and it takes more pages. But one of the ways of sort of working intersectionally is the multiple voices and multiple perspectives, right? And so you get sort of this larger universe talking about similar things, and this sort of core pieces kind of come together in the middle. And so it was really important to have all these different professionals telling, speaking from where they came from, because theme studies are about National Register, National Historic Landmarks. So it's about filling out that government document, which is a National Register nomination. It's a lot less painful if you tell yourself, I'm not telling the history, I'm filling out a government form, because there's like a way to do it. But all of those takes, all of those perspectives, all of those ways at coming at that were all valid and worked. But right, there was, had to have conversations, it had to be place-based. And for some of the historians, not to diss on historians, but like historians don't often do place-based work. And so they were like, yeah, I'm talking about San Francisco, or I'm talking about New York, or I'm talking about Miami, or I'm talking about Chicago or Reno. And it's like, no, I need an address of where the thing happened. I need to be able to like get in my car and go to that place and stand in that spot. That's what I mean by place-based. Like I need those specifics. We got there. Yeah. Hey, Ricardo, good to have you join us.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a challenge, but it's also really, really rewarding. The stories that come out when you insist on an intersectional perspective. Yeah. Right. Like,
yeah.
We were.
I mean, the other thing I think about.
Go ahead. So, yep. There's me looking pleased as punch with the theme study. On the left is the director of the Park Service at the time, John Jarvis, and on my right is the.
So, Megan, I'm having some internet issues. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. On the right is Sally Jewell, who was the Secretary of Interior at the time, and behind us is a panel from the AIDS quilt that they brought in for the release of the theme study. Yeah, I mean, originally we thought the theme study would be, pre-Stonewall, Stonewall to HIV, HIV to activism, right? Like, we already knew we weren't going to stop at 50 years because that was going to already put us before Stonewall. And also, I'm like, how can you tell the LGBTQ history of America and not talk about HIV and not talk about ACT UP and not talk about Queer Nation and not talk about same-sex marriage and not talk about trans rights and all of these things. So we were actually editing the text right up until it had to be finalized days. But yeah, we got the scholars together. We were like, here's our nice little timeline. And they were like, absolutely not. That is a white, male, cisgendered, urban, middle class history. And that is not the history that we're doing. And I was like, oh yeah, you are absolutely correct. That is not the history we're doing. And so we took a thematic approach to sort of get at that intersectionality. And so that was really, really rewarding. And working intersectionally is super messy.
Yeah.
But it's so rewarding. Like, just when it eliminates these tidy narratives, and I love messy history. Like, don't give me a narrative from A to B, A to C. Like, give me the whole mess because people are complicated. History is complicated,
Yeah.
but also fascinating. So yeah, I am a big fan of messy history. I understand there's reasons you want like chapters and textbooks, but also it's all connected.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. And the thing I appreciate about the approach to the theme study, because it's like it's the process is as important as the final product or the outcome.
100%. Yeah. And am I back? I'm back. We had folks who worked on
Right?
it.
Because you're bringing all these voices along.
You're back.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so let me say this real quick, and apologies, y'all. I'm still in Italy, so my internet is going in and out. It's hard life over here. Um, so here's the thing. So I was saying, I appreciate the process of it, right? So sometimes it's not the product. It's as important as the how did we get there? Who did I get a chance to bring along? How are we doing and thinking differently about how we want this to be different? And it all is it's in the details. It's in the how you get there. And I've found that when you do that messy work, that is the heavier lift, because it's always easy to do the easy thing. That's why people do it, because it's the easy way to do it. But the work that we're talking about, the work that you led, that requires a little bit more of us. And I think and I'm certainly am proud to see what you and the other colleagues created as an outcome of that collaboration. And I also say, yes, it helped fill in some gaps, or start to fill in some of the gaps that exist on the National Register related to LGBTQ history. But it also encouraged state and local governments to do their own studies. I was involved in the DC LGBTQ plus context study. And that was important, and it built on the work, Megan, that you helped lead.
Yeah. It has legs. Like it still has
Yeah.
legs. And it's
Yep.
was 16 to 23. It's 7 years. Oh my God. 7 years ago it was released, and it's still, right? It's still getting used, and people are teaching from it, and people
Yeah.
are, right? And that's amazing. But one of the things that I really moves me as a queer person is when folks find it,
Mm.
and they, right? So working on that study was like super emotional. I mean, same-sex marriage became legal in 2016. There were like decades before that of fights about it, right? So the government on on the congressional record saying horrible, awful things about queer folks, right? Like just
Mm.
the worst of the worst. Um, and I mean, I came out in '87, so my options were, as a lesbian, were I could be a predator, I could be a victim, I could be crazy, or I could be dead. Like those were my options.
Yeah.
Um, and so the fact that a federal government, who until recently at that time had been sort of out to get me, me being queer folks,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to document queer history and heritage and places across the United States, saying, no, you're important and your history is important. Like I cried like a baby.
Yeah.
And lots of people working on this were like really moved. And it was really an emotional experience to do the work.
Yeah.
Um, and to have a history is like really something, right? If you know your history, and like where you came from, and who your people are, and who your heroes are, and like you have a set, like congratulations, like really, like it's like you have no idea how important that is until you don't have that. And I think, I think this idea of sort of representation, having come out in '87 in that environment, I think has really stuck with me and has really sort of driven why I do this work that I do, to facilitate and tell these stories. But I really enjoy when folks find the theme study, and because it was also specifically written that a member of the public can pick it up and read it and understand. So we had to like weed out a lot of the jargon.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
And it was beautiful to read. And the thing that I remember, I think we talked about this at one of the events connected to the study, was that the like the emotional labor that comes along with this work. Like the work is good, but if you are somehow connected in some way to the work that you're doing, there's an extra layer that's there that we don't often talk about, Megan.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, because maybe we're all trained to kind of keep this distance, like, we're objective. We're professionals. This is what we are. We're putting our hats on. I'm a preservationist today, and you take it off, you go back into all the other identities that you have.
That's such crap, though. That's not how it actually works.
Yeah.
Right? It's just and why shouldn't there be joy in the work that we do? Why shouldn't we like get excited and get emotionally involved and fall in love with our projects? Like, why is that unprofessional? Like,
yeah, no, it's a good question to ask. It's one that I revisit from time to time. It's like, how much do you show here in this space, or what does this look like, or how do you contain some excitement here but also we have this professional space, or what do you do with the pain that you have to carry and to preserve and to talk about that work, and you feel that in a deeper type of way. So yeah,
I actually worked with a fella who left commercial preservation.
Yeah.
Because he said I feel like a funeral director.
Wow.
Right? Like, I feel like I'm doing all this work so that they can tear it down or pave it over or dig it up. Right? Because National Register doesn't protect you from that. It just means you have to do a little more work, pay a little more money, but it doesn't stop anybody from tearing anything down.
Yep.
And he really felt like it was crushing his soul to sort of carry these places through this destructive process when he got into this work because he loves the work. And he left. Yeah. And I was like, yeah.
This work gets heavy. It gets heavy. But to quote Frankie Beverly and Mays, there's joy and pain, and sunshine and rain. So it's not easy, but it's worth it.
I love working with the public.
Yeah.
And when you can, a lot of folks sort of move through I don't understand it, but a lot of folks move through the world sort of disconnected from history, from what's around them, from how their life connects to the broader history. I mean, I did too. I hated local history when I was a kid. I grew up in a small town, and I was like, no, I have come to realize, like, all history is local, like all of it, all of it is local. So all of these local things connect to these broader themes. I forget where I was going. It's totally fine.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I mean, you're right. It is all local, and just to let folks know, some of the strongest preservation laws are at the local level. Like that's where most of the teeth are. And as Megan pointed out, National Register designation doesn't necessarily protect a historic site from things happening, but those local stories, because people are so invested, and these places, and you have politicians who will get up and go to the mat for these historic buildings and places that matter to communities.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And if a National Register listing triggers a local ordinance, then that's where it doesn't get torn down.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep.
So this is good. So, Megan, we've gone a lot of places in this conversation. So here's something that I'm thinking about is, I've used this hashtag like 50 years ahead because I'm thinking about, the work that we're doing is really a conversation with the future. Like, yeah, the past is our medium. It's the lens in which we, see things, see the world, see who we are, understand identity and culture and history and legacy and nationhood. And all of these things are rooted in our past, but they're really conversations about who do we want to be? What parts of ourselves, of our collective history do we want to bring into the future, and we want to communicate to generations that haven't been born. So I'm just curious from your perspective and the work that you've done, that you've led. What are some of the things that you're thinking about that young professionals who are coming up, where should they be? What should they be thinking? What questions should they be grappling with? What do you think? Yeah.
Well, I mean, definitely you want to connect from where you are, right? So being a queer immigrant, I immigrated to the States from Canada, shapes how I interact with the world and shapes the questions I'm going to ask about the past. People will tell you that is not objective work. And it's like, but it's actually better work because you're asking questions that other people won't think about. And that is a plus when you're trying to understand stuff.
Yeah.
When I was working with the 19th Amendment commemoration, sometimes we would run into stuff like you talk about, African American women working for the right to vote, and you talk about, some of the crap that they had to deal with and the violence, and people would be like, but we shouldn't talk about that because that's not who we are. And it's like, if you look at this sort of messy history, it's like, that's absolutely who we are. But what I hear you saying is that's not who we want to be. Mm-hmm. And that is an opening to work to make a better society, right? Yep. When somebody says, that's not who we are, it's like, well, the data says actually, yes. But that's an opening to say, well, we need to face the past. We need to face that. We need to say that is who we collectively are, and that is our history collectively, even if you think it's not your history, like you think it's queer history, or you think it's Latino history, or you think it's whatever history, like it's still American history, it's still your history. So when people say that's not who we are, it's like, what I hear is that's not who I want to be.
Yeah.
And that is an opportunity to have these conversations and to sort of move the ball forward. I think moving forward, I think we're going to see a lot more work with the silenced histories, the silenced stories that just have not been, sort of seen to be important to preservation. And it's like, look, you got to I'm going to say it. Part of the reason I think that a lot of these sort of marginal places where marginalized communities live are not included, right? Apart from the history of the National Register, which was like, it started in 1966. Like literally, you look at some of those early nominations, and it's like pretty building. Right, it itself is an artifact of its history, but I wonder what would happen if this is a little inside baseball for folks. The National Register, like you have to have integrity to be listed, but a lot of pressure is put on that physical,
architectural significance.
The architectural significance versus like the important social, cultural history, the people. And I wonder what would happen if we flipped those sections on a register nomination. So instead of the building description first, we put the significance history description first. Anyway, but I think we'll see more and more of those communities finding ways to have those places that are important to them recognized and preserved. And I think, well, I hope, right, that we will see more and more folks from those marginalized communities finding ways to get into historic preservation and do that work, because people are always going to say you have a self-interest by doing women's history or queer history, and it's like, A, yes, B, there's nothing wrong with that, right? And C, a good anthropologist will tell you you always want an insider to help you with those things, right? And if the people whose history it is can do that work, that's even better, right? Right now, that takes some of us holding the door open and consciously making decisions about who we work with and how we frame that work and how much authority we have. And it's hard to let go of authority, right? Like, but I have a PhD. I am like, nah, nope. I'm just here to facilitate.
Yeah.
I'm not the expert in this. I'm here to facilitate those stories being told. I think virtual reality. Yeah. Right. Like, it's coming. We might as well use it, right? And as I said, there is nothing that replaces being in a space. There's nothing that replaces seeing a piece of art in real life. But with virtual reality, like, folks can go to those places, they can have tours in those places, and you can recreate the past and move through those spaces. And some of the early work on, going back to like Second Life and stuff, archaeologists would go into Second Life and build their sites. I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Çatalhöyük in Turkey. They went to recreate what this place would be like using the archaeological record. And they were like, oh my God, like, what does the light look like? What does it sound like? What is it? Is there smoke in this building or not smoke in this building? Right? It opened up this avenue to have all these conversations about environment that archaeologists hadn't really thought about before. So when you're trying to recreate those places, so I think we can get a lot of rich thinking, not just cool visiting, not just cool virtual visiting, but also some nice, rich thinking about taking the archaeology and really making it not just 3-dimensional, but 4-dimensional, right? You get the time. What happens to the light as during a day, as the sun goes through? Like, what does that feel like? What does it smell like? What does it look like? Some really, 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 really cool stuff has come out of that sort of thinking about space in the virtual.
Yeah. Man, yeah, Megan, I think these are all great suggestions. And the point that really resonates, one, I'm a huge fan of leveraging technology as a storytelling strategy and a way to make these stories more accessible to all different types of people, right? But then the other thing is this idea around the reordering of, what do we think is important? Is it the building, or is it the community or the people that made this building significant? I think that's a really, really important point. And this, this has been an incredible conversation. It also reminds me that we haven't caught up in far too long in person. So when I'm back in DC, I'm looking forward to hanging out and having a longer discussion.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Megan, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate your time, and looking forward to seeing you very soon.
Thank you. And I mean, the answer is it's the people.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, no problem. And hang on for a second. And so for those who are still on, please tune in next week. We will host Mr. Teddy Pierre out of New Orleans, who is a master craftsman in masonry. We've done work in cemeteries. So if you enjoy cemeteries and enjoy learning about masonry, please come to the conversation with Teddy next week. And with that being said, have a great day, and thank y'all for watching.
Thanks, y'all.